What really hides on Mars? For millennia, it was a campfire story, a blood-red wanderer in the celestial river, a god of war watching from a distance. Ancient hands in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China carved its likeness into stone, charting its path with a reverence that bordered on fear. They saw a portent, an omen, a flicker of cosmic anger. But they were looking with the naked eye, reading a story in a single pixel of red light. They could never have imagined what a mechanical eye, sent across the void, would find. The story of Mars as we know it, and as we don't, begins not with myth, but with a photograph. A single, grainy, black and white frame that would divide the world into skeptics and believers, and pose the most profound question in human history. Are we alone? The year is 1976. In a cold, humming control room at NASA, a scientist with a determined gaze leans over a freshly developed image from the Viking 1 orbiter. His job is to find a safe landing spot for a future mission, but his eyes are drawn to something else. There, in a region of mesas and blasted plains called Cydonia, is something that looks impossible. It is a landform nearly 2 miles long that bears an uncanny resemblance to a humanoid face, staring up from the Martian dust into the blackness of space. The light is harsh, the shadows long, but the features are undeniable. A forehead, eyes, a nose, a mouth. The room buzzes with a mixture of disbelief and electric anticipation. Is it a trick of light and shadow? A geological coincidence of incredible scale? Or is it something else? The image is released to the public, and the world ignites. A news anchor with a commanding voice interrupts evening broadcasts, the photograph flickering onto millions of television screens. On the streets of New York, crowds gather, their faces upturned, mouths agape, clutching newspapers with the impossible headline. For a moment, the collective gasp of humanity echoes around the planet. The face on Mars becomes an instant icon, a symbol of a universe suddenly far more mysterious and intimate than we had ever imagined. It speaks to a primal human need, the desire not to be alone, the hope that someone, somewhere, is looking back. But almost as quickly as the wonder spreads, the official narrative takes hold. At a crowded press conference, under the bright, sterile lights of flashing cameras, NASA dismisses the formation as a simple mesa, a natural play of light and shadow, nothing more than a geological inkblot. A journalist with determined eyes scribbles furiously, capturing the careful, deliberate language of denial, a sense of suspicion growing in her gaze. The official story is set. The face is an illusion. But for millions, the denial feels too quick, too dismissive. It feels less like a scientific conclusion and more like a door being deliberately shut. In the years that follow, the photograph becomes a cultural battleground. In cluttered basements, conspiracy researchers pin the image to corkboards, connecting it with red strings to ancient monuments on Earth, their whispers painting a grand narrative of a lost cosmic civilization. In hushed, candlelit libraries, philosophers and historians gaze at the image, questioning whether our most ancient myths of gods from the sky are not allegories, but fragmented memories. And in university lecture halls, mathematicians and astronomers point to the strange geometry of the surrounding Cydonia region, sketching equations that hint at patterns too disciplined to be random chance. The debate rages in late-night radio shows, where passionate hosts give voice to a public that feels it is being lied to, the speculation spreading like wildfire across the airwaves. The story is no longer about a single photograph. It is about trust. It is about who gets to tell the story of humanity. In a dim war room, a military general with a stern expression stares at the Cydonia region projected on a glowing map table, his clenched fists suggesting the debate is not merely academic, but a matter of national security. Is the face a threat, a message, or a myth? In a high-security office, a political advisor sweats under sterile fluorescent lights, holding a confidential folder, caught between loyalty to his government and the gnawing suspicion that the public has a right to know the truth. The question is no longer just what is it, but what are you hiding? The image of the face becomes a cultural touchstone. A young filmmaker in a cluttered editing room obsessively replays the grainy NASA footage, convinced he can find the truth between the frames. A museum curator holds an ancient Sumerian carving of a humanoid face, a chill running down her spine as she notes the chilling parallel between a monument on Earth and a photograph from Mars. In backyards across suburban America, children with cardboard telescopes look up at the red star, their innocent wonder a pure reflection of the question that now hangs over a generation. What if the stories are true? The story has escaped the confines of science and has become a modern myth, a powerful symbol of the unknown. And as humanity aims its newly built satellite dishes toward the heavens, a sense of anticipation grows. We are no longer just looking at Mars. We are listening for an echo, a confirmation of the impossible thing we saw in a single, haunting photograph, wondering if the first chapter of a much older, grander story has finally been found. The official story was sealed. The face on Mars was a trick of the light, a geological coincidence. Case closed. But for a growing number of independent researchers, sifting through the grainy data packets of the Viking mission in cluttered basements and university archives, the case had just been opened. The question was no longer just about the face. It was about its neighbors. As investigators painstakingly enhanced the limited photographs, an entire landscape of impossible structures began to emerge from the digital noise. The face was not an isolated anomaly. It appeared to be the silent, eroded centerpiece of a vast, unnerving complex sprawling across the Cydonia region, a silent, geometric city of ghosts. In sterile labs and crowded lecture halls, the evidence was debated with a hushed intensity. To the south of the face stood a colossal five-sided pyramid, its angles too clean, its form too deliberate to be a simple mountain forged by wind and time. Nearby, a cluster of smaller, three-sided pyramids seemed to mirror the star constellation Pleiades with an eerie precision. A massive, buttress structure, dubbed the Fortress, contained perfect right angles and what looked like collapsed internal courtyards, its shadow stretching for miles across the plain. And connecting them all was a grid of straight lines and intersections that researchers began calling the city square. It was a landscape that screamed of intention, of a blueprint. Geologists, their faces illuminated by the cool blue light of monitors, pointed to natural erosion patterns, but mathematicians, hunched over glowing light tables, countered with calculations of their own. This was not random geology, they argued. This was archaeology on a planetary scale. The movement was spearheaded by science writer Richard Hoagland, a tireless, controversial figure who became the public face of the investigation. In cluttered studies filled with notebooks and maps linked by red string, and on late-night radio shows where his passionate voice crackled across the airwaves, he and his team presented their findings. A female mathematician with intense focus scribbled elegant equations across chalkboards, revealing what she claimed were sophisticated geometric and mathematical constants encoded in the relationships between the structures, ratios like pi, e, and the golden mean, reappearing with a frequency that defied coincidence. They argued that the Cydonia complex was a deliberate message, a mathematical language written in stone and sand, waiting to be decoded. To them, this was not just a ruin, it was an inheritance. The pressure mounted on NASA, a grassroots movement of citizen scientists, researchers, and ordinary people captivated by the mystery, began a relentless campaign. Letters flooded in. Phone lines lit up at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. They had one simple, powerful demand: take another picture. With new, more powerful probes like the Mars Global Surveyor heading to Mars, the technology existed to either prove or disprove the theory once and for all. If it was just a pile of rocks, show us the rocks. For years, NASA resisted, citing technical limitations, orbital mechanics, and mission priorities. But the silence only fueled the suspicion. In a tense mission control room, engineers and officials debated the risks. What if Hoagland was right? The political, religious, and ontological fallout would be immeasurable. Secrecy, it seemed, was the safer orbit. A spokesperson with a tense jaw stood before flashing cameras, his carefully chosen words a masterclass in institutional deflection. Finally, in 1998, under immense public pressure, NASA's Mars Global Surveyor probe flew over Cydonia. The world held its breath. The agency released a new photograph, and the result was a gut punch to the independent research community. The image was dark, taken at a poor angle under hazy atmospheric conditions and processed with a heavy hand. The once clear features of the face were now a lumpy, eroded mess. NASA triumphantly declared the debate over, a victory for geology. But for investigators, the fight had just begun. They called it the catbox image, a picture so deliberately bad, so technically incompetent, it felt like an insult. In darkened labs, computer analysts worked feverishly on the new photograph. They claimed to find evidence of digital tampering, a deliberate blurring and manipulation of the data. You don't run an image through a high-pass and a low-pass filter simultaneously unless you are trying to actively obscure detail, not reveal it, one analyst stated, his face grim. A NASA technician, speaking anonymously to a journalist in a dingy motel room, whispered of images that were locked away, of data streams that were rerouted, of a culture of fear within the agency. A whistleblower with haunted eyes revealed internal memos, their glowing classified stamps a testament to a truth being actively suppressed. Why would an agency dedicated to discovery work so hard to hide what it found? What were they so afraid of? The narrative was no longer about ancient aliens. It was about a modern cover-up. The mystery of Cydonia had turned inward, becoming a story about power, secrecy, and the public's right to know. In a dim apartment, a hacker with restless energy worked to breach NASA's digital walls, seeking the original, unaltered data telemetry. In a quiet university office, a mathematician aligned the angles of the Cydonia pyramids with star charts, her work suggesting a celestial alignment that pointed to a specific, ancient moment in time, the last terrestrial ice age. The evidence, though circumstantial, was piling up into a mountain as large as any on Mars. The structures were real, their geometry was intelligent, and the official story was a lie. The question that closed the second chapter of this saga was no longer what is on Mars, but what is happening at NASA. The silence from the agency was deafening, and in that silence, a terrifying possibility began to take shape. Perhaps they were not hiding a discovery. Perhaps they were hiding a memory of a civilization that was not ours. The suspicion of a cover-up had taken root. The catbox image was not an answer. It was an insult, a poorly rendered piece of digital misdirection that only deepened the mystery. For independent researchers, the question evolved. If an agency dedicated to discovery was willing to publicly obscure what was on Mars, what might they be doing in secret? The answer, according to a trail of whispers, smuggled film reels, and declassified documents, was far more audacious than anyone could have imagined. While the public was being told Mars was a dead, sterile world, a shadow narrative was unfolding, a story of secret missions, psychic spies, and a history that connected Earth and Mars not by theory, but by a long-forgotten tether. The story begins in the shadow of the Saturn V rocket, the colossal engine of the Apollo program. Officially, the program ended with Apollo 17 in 1972. But what if it didn't? A persistent, detailed conspiracy, known as Project Red Sun, claims that missions 18, 19, and 20 were secretly launched with a new, clandestine objective. Their destination was not the moon, but Mars. In dim attics and cluttered garages, elderly men with haunted eyes and faded mission patches would speak to journalists in hushed tones, their voices heavy with the weight of a secret kept for decades. They claimed to be former astronauts and technicians from these Black Ops missions. Grainy, degraded 16mm film, allegedly smuggled out of secure archives, flickered to life in dark screening rooms. The footage showed astronauts in bulky, retro suits walking not on the gray plains of the moon, but under a pale pink sky, across a landscape of reddish-brown dust. In one chilling sequence, the camera pans across a desolate Martian ridge to reveal something impossible. A colossal, cigar-shaped spacecraft, miles long, resting in a crater like a beached whale, its hull pockmarked by eons of micrometeorite impacts. It was not human. Another piece of alleged footage showed the interior of the craft and the discovery of a humanoid female entity, perfectly preserved, with strange features and thin, pilot-like tubes connected to her face. The official response was swift and absolute. The stories were hoaxes, the footage faked, the men charlatans. Yet the details were stubbornly consistent. The narrators, interviewed decades apart, described the same thin atmosphere, the same reddish terrain, the same sense of profound, ancient silence. They spoke of discovering not just a ship, but ruins, the collapsed remains of towering structures, pyramids eroded by eons of dust storms, evidence of a civilization so old it had turned back into geology. It was a narrative too fantastic to believe, yet too detailed to easily dismiss. But the most startling evidence came not from retired astronauts, but from a program the CIA was forced to declassify. In the 1970s, at the height of the Cold War, the agency launched Project Stargate, a top-secret initiative to weaponize psychic abilities. They recruited gifted individuals, known as remote viewers, to see inside enemy installations from thousands of miles away. In a sterile government chamber lined with one-way glass, a man with closed eyes would sit in silence, a monitor feeding him a series of random coordinates. His mission? To describe what he saw at that location. In May of 1984, one of the program's most successful viewers, Joseph McMoneygle, was given a sealed envelope containing a set of coordinates. He described a harsh, dusty landscape under a strange, thin sky. He saw towering pyramids, smooth-sided and immense, larger than any on Earth. He saw evidence of a dying civilization, a people ancient and tall, desperately trying to survive a planetary cataclysm involving a massive cosmic impact. The coordinates he had been given were not on Earth. They were in the Cydonia region of Mars, a million years in the prehistoric past. The Stargate files, now public, are a treasure trove of impossible, officially documented visions. Viewer after viewer described the same things: vast, underground shelters, inhabitants struggling with a collapsing atmosphere, and a final, desperate exodus to a nearby planet, a blue-green world teeming with life. Inside the agency, the data was a paradox. Analysts, accustomed to satellite photos and radio intercepts, didn't know what to do with information that arrived via human consciousness. But it was often startlingly accurate. The implications were staggering. Declassified government documents, the very definition of official record, seemed to confirm the wildest theories, that Mars once held an advanced civilization, that it suffered a catastrophe, and that its survivors may have come to Earth. The line between science fiction and national security had blurred into non-existence. In quiet, candlelit libraries, philosophers and mythologists began connecting the dots. Was the story of the Anunnaki from ancient Sumerian texts, of gods who came from the sky and created humanity in their image, not a myth, but a distorted memory of Martian refugees? Did the secret missions of Project Red Sun not discover a dead civilization, but confirm our own forgotten origin story? The evidence from these two hidden worlds, the covert space program and the psychic intelligence operations, converged on the same impossible narrative. A deep, ancient bond exists between humans and Mars, a connection that has been deliberately erased from our history. The third act of this cosmic drama closes with a chilling realization. The question is no longer whether we can go to Mars. The evidence, from both smuggled film and declassified files, suggests we have already been there, in secret. The real question is why the missions were hidden. What did our secret explorers find in those ancient ruins that was so world-altering, so terrifying, that it had to be buried under decades of denial and ridicule? The search for life on Mars may be a public performance, a piece of scientific theater to distract us from the truth that we have already found it. We have not just found it. We may be it. And if our own government knows this, then the greatest mystery is not what lies on Mars, but what lies in the locked archives and silent, guarded halls right here on Earth. The implications left by the secret missions and psychic spies were staggering, suggesting a shared genesis between Earth and Mars. But this revelation only opened the door to a darker, more terrifying question. If Mars once hosted a civilization, perhaps even our own ancestors, where did they go? Why is the red planet now a silent, frozen graveyard, a world of ruins whispering under a thin, poisoned sky? The answer, according to a growing body of scientific evidence that sits uncomfortably at the edge of mainstream acceptance, is not that the civilization died out. It's that it was murdered. The investigation begins in a sterile laboratory with a scientist named Dr. John Brandenburg, a plasma physicist with a career in advanced propulsion systems and defense projects. His work brought him to the atmospheric data sent back from Mars by our probes, and in the cold, hard numbers, he found something that didn't belong. In two specific regions of the planet, Cydonia, the site of the face and pyramids, and another region halfway around the planet called Utopia, the data showed massive, anomalous spikes of xenon-129. On Earth, this specific isotope is a telltale fingerprint, a smoking gun found in the atmosphere only after the detonation of a massive hydrogen bomb. Brandenburg's conclusion, published in peer-reviewed journals to the shock and scorn of many colleagues, was as simple as it was horrifying. Mars was the site of at least two massive, ancient, and deliberate nuclear attacks. The face and the pyramids were not just monuments. They were tombstones marking the graves of cities. This theory, once relegated to the fringe, began to gain a terrifying credibility as it explained other Martian mysteries. In a futuristic simulation chamber, climate researchers run holographic models of Mars' deep past. The image that forms is not the red desert we know, but a breathtakingly beautiful world of deep blue oceans, swirling white clouds, and green-brown continents. Mars was not always a red planet. It was Earth's twin, a living, breathing world with a thick, oxygen-rich atmosphere. The nuclear hypothesis provided a mechanism for its death, a series of planet-shattering explosions powerful enough to strip away the atmosphere, boil the oceans into space, and shock the planet into a permanent, frozen state of nuclear winter. The red dust that now covers Mars is not just iron oxide. It is the rust of a dead world, the lingering radioactive fallout from a war of unimaginable scale. But was Mars the only victim? In quiet observatories, astrophysicists turned their attention to the great scar in our solar system, the asteroid belt. The theory that it was simply leftover material from a failed planet had always been a tidy but unsatisfying explanation. Now, a new, more violent hypothesis gained traction, the story of a lost planet, sometimes called Maldek, that once existed between Mars and Jupiter. What if this planet was the primary target in a cosmic war, its complete annihilation creating the asteroid belt? In this scenario, Mars was not the center of the conflict, but merely a nearby casualty, its civilization and biosphere wiped out by the shockwave and nuclear fallout from the destruction of its neighbor. It wasn't just a victim, it was a survivor, a witness scarred for eternity. This chilling scientific hypothesis began to resonate with our most ancient and violent myths. Historians in candlelit studies revisited the Sanskrit epic, the Mahabharata, which described a devastating war of the gods, complete with flying craft called Vimanas and a weapon brighter than 1,000 suns, that could destroy an entire army, leaving behind scorched earth and poisoned water for generations. They read of the war between the gods and the Titans in Greek mythology, of celestial battles that shook the heavens. Were these just primitive stories? Or were they the fragmented, trauma-laced memories of a real cosmic war, passed down through millennia by the terrified survivors who found refuge on Earth? An elderly whistleblower, his face obscured in shadow, speaks of classified analyses from the 1980s that drew direct parallels between the descriptions of mythic superweapons and the expected effects of a planetary nuclear exchange. In sterile laboratories, geologists examined Martian meteorites, their surfaces showing evidence of having been subjected to sudden, intense heat, melted and fused in an instant. The story was the same everywhere they looked. Mars died quickly, violently, and unnaturally. The central question of the investigation shifted from what happened to who was responsible. Was this a planetary suicide, a civilization on Mars that destroyed itself with its own weapons, a chilling prophecy for Earth's own nuclear standoff? Or was it an attack, an invasion by an unknown, hostile force that wiped out two planets and left our solar system a graveyard? The final, haunting montage of this act is a series of slow, deliberate dissolves. The image of a mushroom cloud from an atomic test on Earth fades into a holographic simulation of a massive explosion blooming over the Martian plains. The face of a frightened child in a bomb shelter during the Cold War dissolves into the silent, eroded face on Mars. The ruins of Hiroshima, a city erased by a single blast, dissolve into the speculative ruins of Cydonia. The message, delivered not in words but in powerful, resonant images, is clear. The story of Mars is not a fantasy. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is a warning. The red planet hangs in our night sky not as a god of war, but as a silent, radioactive memorial, a reminder that civilizations, even those that span planets, can be erased. And as we stare at our own reflection in its dusty, silent surface, we are forced to ask the final, terrifying question of this chapter. If a civilization fell to war in our own solar system, is humanity destined to repeat the same mistake? Are we next? Mars hangs in our consciousness as a warning, a planetary tombstone bearing the scars of a nuclear holocaust. But the story does not end in the red dust. As our probes push deeper into the Martian system, they turn their cameras toward its strange, captured moons. And on Phobos, the larger of the two, they found something that defied all explanation. It is a perfect, rectangular monolith, a geometric anomaly standing erect on a lifeless, potato-shaped rock. Scientists offered explanations of natural fracture, but the structure's sharp angles and isolated placement felt deliberate, artificial. This discovery fueled one of the most persistent and unsettling theories about the Martian system, that Phobos is not a natural moon at all, but a colossal, ancient, and hollow space station, a silent orbital sentinel watching over a ruined world. This idea, once confined to the wildest fringes of speculation, crashed into the mainstream through the actions of a Scottish hacker named Gary McKinnon. In 2002, searching for evidence of UFO cover-ups, McKinnon breached the most secure computer networks of the U.S. military and NASA. What he claims to have found was explosive. He saw spreadsheets listing non-terrestrial officers, ship-to-ship transfer logs for vessels with names like the USSS LeMay and USSS Helen Coetter, names that didn't exist in any official Navy registry. And he found a file containing the name of a secret, multinational space fleet, Solar Warden. McKinnon's claims suggested that humanity's presence in space was a generation ahead of what the public was being told. We didn't just have shuttles and satellites, we had a fleet. His story opened the floodgates. Whistleblowers, once silenced by fear and non-disclosure agreements, began to step forward with stories that were even more incredible. They spoke of a program known as 20 and Back, a tour of duty unlike any other. They claimed that as young men and women with specific genetic markers, they were recruited into this secret space program, serving for 20 years in off-world conflicts and on interstellar missions. At the end of their service, they were age-regressed back to their original age and memory wiped, returned to civilian life with only lingering, dreamlike memories of a life lived among the stars. In hushed, emotional interviews, they described serving on massive spacecraft, fighting alongside non-human allies in a silent war against predatory extraterrestrial forces, a conflict fought in the dark voids between planets. They spoke of memories that felt like ghosts, of skills they didn't know how they learned, of a profound sense of loss for a life they couldn't fully recall. The narrative threads, once separate, began to weave themselves into a single, cohesive tapestry. The ruins on Mars, the monolith on Phobos, the secret space fleet. Were they all part of the same hidden history? Historians and mythologists returned to the most ancient texts on Earth, the Sumerian cuneiform tablets. They told the story of the Anunnaki, a race of gods who descended from the heavens in fiery chariots, created humanity in their image, built the Great Pyramids as celestial markers, and fought devastating wars in the sky. The parallels were undeniable. The pyramids on Earth, particularly in Giza, seemed to mirror the geometric layout of the structures in Cydonia, as if built from a shared cosmic blueprint. Was it possible that the Anunnaki were the survivors of the Martian cataclysm, and that humanity was their legacy, a second Genesis on a new world? In this grand, unsettling vision, Earth and Mars are not two separate stories, but two chapters of the same book. The search for the truth about Mars is no longer an astronomical or archaeological endeavor. It is a search for ourselves, for our own origin story, for the part of our history that has been deliberately cut away and buried. The activists on the street chanting for disclosure, the hackers hunting for files in the digital dark, the whistleblowers risking their lives to speak. They are all part of a species-wide immune response, an attempt to recover a memory that has been systemically suppressed. The film does not offer a final, simple answer. It cannot. The evidence is too fragmented, the official silence too absolute. Instead, it ends with a powerful, lingering question. We see a montage of all the mysteries: the face on Mars, the derelict ship from the alleged Apollo 20 footage, the Stargate psychic sketch of a dying civilization, the Xenon 129 graph, the monolith on Phobos, a child holding a drawing of a starship. Are these all just illusions, a grand collection of hoaxes, coincidences, and wishful thinking? Is it all just a fantastic conspiracy theory, a modern myth for a technological age? Or, the narrator asks in a final, quiet voiceover, are these the scattered, half-remembered fragments of our own forgotten history? Are we the descendants of a lost, cosmic civilization, living on a beautiful, fragile world with a collective, species-wide amnesia? The final shot is not of Mars. It is of a child in a field at dusk, looking up at the night sky, their face filled with a mixture of wonder and innate recognition, as if they are looking at an old, familiar home. The search for Mars, in the end, has led us back to Earth, not with answers, but with a profound and world-altering question about who we truly are.